when you meet a Great Hearts graduate, we're saying yes to graduating the kinds of young adults who are going to look you in the eye and look through to your soul and see your heart and see you. And we're saying yes to the ability for our students to read thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of writing. Their reading list is equivalent to what I did in my PhD program at the University of Dallas, and a little bit more than that.
Here today with the executive headmaster of Great Hearts in Irving, Dr. Amber Dyer. Thanks for joining, Dr. Amber.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a joy to be with you today.
I want to give a brief intro about your school, which is quite impressive. The largest classical upper school in America, almost 1,000 students, it sounds like. So it's a charter school, so it's tuition free. Families speak 59 different languages at your school, and yet you lead the National Classical Academy education movement as a flagship academy. So, for example, your most recent class, 10% national merit and College Board honors, 100% college acceptance, highest SAT averages of all Great Hearts, because this charter network has many schools. But I love this. Most importantly, our highest aim is to graduate young people whose lives have been radically transformed by the truth, goodness, and beauty contained in the Western classical tradition. That's beautiful. How do you accomplish all that? That's pretty impressive.
I accomplish none of it. I hire really good people, and we partner with some of the most amazing families in the world, and we're supported by our wonderful national network of colleagues and leaders in this beautiful work. And so I give all credit to the many fine people who have joined us in this endeavor. But just a little story about Great Hearts. We do have several schools nationally, over 50 schools nationally, and they're all excellent. You can walk into a Great Hearts Academy in Phoenix, or you can walk into our academies in San Antonio or Arlington or Fort Worth, and you're going to see very comparable work to what we have at Great Hearts Irving Upper School going on in any one of those schools. And so but as you've noted already on in my introduction, although Great Hearts Academies are college prep schools, and although we do impressive things with our graduates with their college ambitions and their SAT scores, and all of the academies are achieving those deviations far above our public school, and in many cases, many of our private school counterparts. Although that is the case, our highest vision for the young people at our academies is that they would have hearts that are transformed by the truth, goodness, and beauty of the Western classical tradition. And thus, we are not called just great brains, but we're called great hearts. So we do that in a variety of ways. First of all, as I already noted, we hire really, really good people, um, teachers, faculty, administrators who are aligned with our mission and with our vision, who believe in the transformative power of liberal education. Who see that education is something that's far more than something that has just a merely utilitarian endeavor. In other words, get them those math scores so they can get a job, so they can make money, so they can buy things. Um, so faculty who would be aligned with our vision that say, let's teach numbers and calculus too, so that we can explore the wonder of the world and the truth of the universe that has come to us through the tradition. Um, and they'll get the SAT scores too. But faculty are aligned with that soul formation vision that we have as an organization, and then also an incredible classical liberal arts curriculum. So, Great Hearts curriculum is like no other. I can speak as both a parent and also as one of the Great Hearts school leaders about that, because I had the great joy of getting to lead my own children and love my own children through all the way from kindergarten. Now my oldest is a 10th grader, and see the way that that we use the best curriculum out there, the best that's been thought, written, said, and lived throughout the last 3,000 years, starting in kindergarten, where students they're learning Latin, they're memorizing beautiful poems, the length of a Russian novel. They're they're being read to beautiful stories that ennoble them um, and give it just speak to our human dignity and the dignity that we believe is in every single child who's in our academy. They're starting with kindergarten and then moving all the way through the high school years with that gorgeous curriculum. That's the second, that's the second part of it, I think. But then the third part of it is that we go with the grain in terms of how children learn. And so in the lower grades, in the grammar school grades, um, we are still leaning into a highly Socratic model of education, um, but it's not one that would say that all views or all ideas are somehow equally valid. We actually do believe that truth and goodness and beauty can be found, and that they can be found within the tradition and within our conversation within our community. So by the time a scholar graduates from Great Hearts, he or she, just in high school, will encounter over 1,000 hours of Socratic humane letters conversations, guided by a teacher who does not think that truth is relative, but who believes that truth can be found within this tradition, and who guides that conversation with our young people. Um, our scholars are reading almost the complete works of C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien when they're in middle school, and 7 different Shakespeare plays throughout their time here at Great Hearts. They'll perform in a couple of those Shakespeare plays as well. They'll learn Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas. They'll read a couple of different novels of Dostoevsky. Um, they'll read the Constitution, the Federalist Papers. They'll encounter the Communist Manifesto, and they'll not be told what to think about these things, but they will come to, in conversation with their colleagues, they'll come to say some things that they might that we could agree upon are true as we look at this great tradition together. And so it's not just the curriculum, but it's also the pedagogy that allows us to really lean into the formation of the human person. For each Great Heart student, that going to look a little bit different, because, as I say to our students often, we all have a small S story and a big S story. We have the story that we live, the small S story. That's our individual human a journey. Uh, but then we also have this larger big S human story, the story into which we live. So the story we live and the story we live into. And and here at our academy in Irving, as with the other Great Hearts academies nationally, we're acutely aware of those two different stories, and that story we live into is a story that needs to be retold. That wonderful story of the Western tradition.
Amazing. What a privilege for your students. And if they can all speak as articulately and persuasively as you can, then your job will be successful.
Oh, they far exceed me. They far exceed me.
So there's no entrance requirement. I was kind of surprised to hear that. So why isn't every public school like Great Hearts then?
Well, that's a great question. We want to know the answer to that too, good doctor. But we are seeing is that 25 years or so ago, when Great Hearts first took this beautiful private school curriculum and model, and our very brave and wonderful founders, Dr. Dan Scoggin, Mr. Jay Heiler, when they put this before the Arizona Charter Board, and were able to show the public school system, the public charter school system in Arizona, what a fine educational model it is, that up until this time had really only been accessible for families who would be able to pay tuition. My understanding is there were only about 300 um, children nationally who had access to this model of education, this classical
Wow.
education. And we've now grown to the most recent number I've seen is over 600,000 young people who are attending classical private schools and charter schools. So the public classical sector has really grown since that time, since Great Hearts sort of launched this classical revival within our public education system. And what we're finding, I'm finding at least interesting here in the Dallas Fort Worth area, is that as our population, even with a lot of people moving to Dallas for jobs and for economic reasons, uh, the politicians tell us it's a great place for business, and the state population has really increased significantly. We saw a little bit of a birth rate decline in the US. We called
Yeah.
the birth rate cliff in 2008 and 2009, where there's just fewer kids, fewer people having babies. We've never quite recovered from that, from the financial crisis of 08, 09. So the birth rate has never, from the research I've done, it's never really stabilized. And so that has hit us in Texas as well. Um, I think because several of the public schools within our area have been closing their doors because of lack of
Mm.
enrollment. So it's either because there are maybe fewer kids or because families are opting for schools like Great Hearts. I can tell you that we still have a waiting list for spaces at our academies. So, to your question of why are not all public schools doing this, well, I could say that my answer to that would be, well, I hope eventually that they will take notice because parents are taking notice. Parents became, I think, acutely aware of what their kids were learning during the pandemic. They saw, they heard, they got to sit over the shoulder of their children as their children were on Zoom doing remote learning and so forth. And we're seeing in the national data that there has been an increasing discontent with public education nationally. And I don't want to disparage what my hardworking friends who are working at non-classical public schools are doing, because those teachers and those administrators are heroes. They're doing really hard human work at those other public schools. Um, with that still being said, there's this incredible model for liberal learning that we have found at Great Hearts over the past, over 20 years, that is bringing up the not only the intellectual formation of young people of all different levels, but it is also shaping their hearts. And ultimately, our goal is that they would walk out of our academies fully alive, having their hearts formed in the way of virtue, and that this education would allow them to encounter their adulthood having fully formed souls as they endeavor to start their careers, to go into college, to form families, and not just be virtuous citizens, but truly to have happy lives that are formed by virtue.
I recently read George Washington's farewell address, which I highly recommend. Maybe I'll read it. And one thing I was kind of surprised to hear is how much he emphasizes the necessary role of religion in a free society, especially, well, explicitly the U.S. Um, so you're talking about pursuing virtue, having a great heart. What role does religion play in that, especially given it obviously it is a public charter school?
Yeah, that is such a great question, because we welcome and embrace all families from all different faiths. or some of our families don't have a faith tradition in their home, and we want those kids, all of the families at our academies, to be given the feast of the best. So, I've mentioned our reading list, our that is for our humane letters courses, but we also offer all of our students take they take biology, chemistry, physics 1, physics 2. They all take calculus 1, calculus 2. We have a one track model both for our curriculum, yeah, and for our pedagogy. So with all of that in mind, um, it was really kind of a new thing. As I used to say to my university students before I left the very easy work of being a college professor to running to the largest classical schools in the world. Um, but as I used to always say to my students when we were studying the Enlightenment, the idea that the human being has no soul, that is a kind of a recent idea in modern Western thought. The Greeks, the Romans, the Hebrews, the Christians, those are the four pillars upon which classical liberal education finds the West has its historical roots. All of those traditions believed their peoples believed that there was something outside of themselves. As we don't look into just ourselves as the well of truth and wisdom, but we would look to outside ourselves. And so we do read, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you're going to read about Zeus and Athena, and in the role of the gods in guiding and in shaping the youth and the warriors alike in those works. Um, we see it in the Aeneid as well. The gods come alongside the humans, and they help inform their way. When we encounter the Book of Exodus, for example, in the Old Testament, which is part of the Western tradition, we see Yahweh coming alongside His people, and then when we are introduced to um, Christ in the New Testament and some of the more recent works of the Western tradition, we also see a world that is permeated by a vision of love and forgiveness, and also with that dimension of the universe that is outside of you and me and our human form, intervening and helping the humans along the way. And so, as a public school, we don't deny our students of thousands of years of the Western tradition. And so we do read those books of the Greeks, of the Romans, of the Hebrews, and the Christians. But as a public school, we are a sectarian, and I think that that is a differentiation between being secular. Being totally secular is hands off, nothing to see here, nothing to see here of 1500 years of Western tradition, but being a sectarian simply means that our faculty are not going to, we're very mindful of the establishment clause. And so we're not going to tell students, this is how you have to worship. We're not going to try to establish a state religion. That's something that we simply don't do as a public school. But will our students have the opportunity to read the Iliad and have Socratic conversation about that, and think about a culture that was so permeated by a belief in the invisible presences, that which is outside the human, a culture that was in that way perhaps maybe more humble than we might be today, knowing that their people were contingent creatures, and perhaps not the center of the universe. That there were bigger things than you or I that guide and direct us, and perhaps to whom we are accountable. Will our students have those conversations every day? You better believe it. They're probably talking about the Iliad right now down down the hallway from me, and considering some of these kinds of big life questions that we don't shy away from at Great Hearts.
What work of the New Testament is in your curriculum?
We read in senior HL. We read the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Luke. We look at and the Gospel of Mark. So we're reading those, wonderful parables, the Sermon on the Mount, and that is in correspondence as well, of course, with looking at Western democracy. What is our how our human anthropology has been so shaped by the Greek, Roman, Hebrew, and Christian tradition. It really is a distinct human anthropology that we find in the West. Our what rolls off our tongues in terms of our understanding as Westerners about the human dignity of every single person, and what rolls off our tongues in terms of our understanding of what that dignity would be, regardless of a person's race, class, whether that person has disabilities or not. Here at Great Hearts, we make this education available to all people. We can sometimes take that for granted in the West. We might not know exactly why it is that the West, that United States has been shaped by some of these foundational ideas about what a human person is to begin with, and what the inherent rights that person ought to be, even if those rights were not always fully realized or understood. We do have these primary sources that guide and lead us into those human freedoms that we enjoy, and that we seek to um, behold in the persons in our midst.
Yeah, I think you're saying that this concept of human dignity stems from Christianity and not pagan Greek and Roman philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, uh, I think so. We are so immersed in secular humanism. As you said, you made that great distinction between asectarian and secular, that we have this allergy to introducing religion into the public square. Uh, to the extent I think that actually contradicts the intention and even explicit wish of the founding fathers. Again, farewell address of George Washington. Uh, so I'm wondering if, yeah, I would love to see a reintroduction of reverence to God in public education and the public square, because I think that's actually part of being American and has been for a long time, although not recently. Um, so I wonder how much thought you've put into that, and could it be the case that there's actually more that schools like Great Heart and other schools could do to have introduced like respect for God, with not only not violating like our founding principles, but actually fulfilling them?
Mm. Well, that's a great question. We are publicly funded, and so we're really mindful of the establishment clause of religion, and so we must, and and we do, and we're happy to follow those laws with our doors being open to all students, and being a public school. So I say this with that in mind, but to your point, though, of this great quality of, I think what you're speaking of is a sense of pietas. This was a great thing that my mentor, the late Dr. Louise Cowan, taught me and spoke of often in our in our study of Virgil's Aeneid together. Aeneas, if you'll remember from that great Roman epic, he's called Pius Aeneas. And one of the glorious things that Pius Aeneas does as he leaves the burning city of Troy is that he takes his father Anchises, who says, "Son, go on without me. Let me burn here. Let me die. I'm old. I'll slow you down." He says, "No way, father." He takes his father and he puts him on his shoulders. And because he is pious Aeneas. So he has that reverence, that respect for his elders. He has that reverence, the respect for the gods of his city. And he takes those out and he puts his father on his shoulder and he takes him out of the burning city of Troy. And he shows that reverence and that respect for him. And so I shared that story with you because although as a public school, we have to be incredibly respectful of the various different faith traditions that are housed here. In our community. So we do believe that parents are children's first educators, that it is for them to make those decisions. We don't establish religion in public schools. We can't, the law prohibits us from that. But what the law would not prohibit one from doing, and I think that really even the spirit of the law would say, yeah, Dr. Dyer and Dr. Dyer's team keep doing this in the public school. What it would not prohibit us from doing is asking these foundational questions about what it means to be a human. What is justice? What is friendship? What is love? And to your point, what is pietas? What is piety? What is the reverence and respect and honor that a human owes to one's ancestors, one's fathers, one's gods, one's faith? And those are certainly questions that come alive very much within the texts of the Western classical tradition. So while we're not going to tell a student, this is the religion you must follow. Um, this is the religion that we are endorsing as a public institution. We'll never do that because, of course, that would be dishonoring to the laws that we follow. Well, we would never do that. What we will do is provide spaces for students to wrestle through these questions with a fantastic mentor, a guide in the classroom, and really with the best texts one can imagine. And they do that, and I see our students graduating from Great Hearts Irving, as well as the Great Hearts Academies where we graduate students nationally, and having a deep piety um, those towards those higher things that inform and show us what beauty is.
To use a specific example, so I wonder, would it in fact be against the law to pray during school and to have like offer a time of prayer during school? And I mean, you mentioned the establishment clause, but and I haven't studied it, so I'm genuinely curious about it, and I'm wondering if you've studied it more. But my understanding is that the establishment clause is there to um, protect religion, not to reduce it. And in fact, if someone would argue that, well, we can't pray in school, that would actually be going against the establishment clause and the vision of the founders.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm probably not the person to ask at this point. Is my understanding is that some of that legal landscape is changing right now. Um, so we don't pray publicly at Great Hearts. Within the Texas Constitution, we do begin the day with Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and one can have a moment of silence as well during that time. And that's the limitation of where my understanding of the law is presently, but I do understand that some of that might be changing. So you'll need to ask your next guest about that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, and maybe part of what you're alluding to is even if it's not against the law, you could still be persecuted for it, and I think would be under the Biden administration, previous administration, and we've seen like Supreme Court cases of teachers being persecuted for praying during football games and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's unfortunately the Justice Department is not always there to uphold the law or the vision of the founders. Um, but yeah, I'm just I would I wonder who the right guest would be, but I would just be curious to think like to what extent are we actually misunderstanding that vision, and what can we do to reintroduce pietas? But anyways, I think you've covered it. So another major topic. What is your school's approach to screens and technology at school?
Yeah, well, Great Hearts was one of the first schools before we have the great research that's come out, as you know, from Jonathan Haidt and others. And I know that you have done a lot of work and research on this matter as well. But before we were even seeing the data of what screens are doing to young people, before we even had any of that, our founders intuited that the best education for the best is the best education for all, as Mortimer Adler says in the Paideia proposal. And so, paper books and human conversation have been our modalities from the very beginning in our Great Hearts Academies. And so we have had a no phone, no iPad policy from the very beginning of our schools. And it's not just the curriculum, but it's also the pedagogy, right? That it allows Great Hearts to be so successful and so much more successful, I think, than many other public schools in terms of academic results. And so, now we have all of the data that to back that up, and we are starting to see some of the public schools follow the data. Other public schools besides Great Hearts follow that data in terms of not having the phones and the screens. But to this, I think one of the most delightful nights of my school year is always when we do our high school preview night, and I bring high school parents up on the stage with me, and I interview them, and I say, what is the best part of having your kids at Great Hearts in the high school? And you think that you're going to get answers like, oh, my kid got the acceptance to the Ivy League school, or got the full ride scholarship, or the SAT scores, or you think it's going to be something like that, but it never is. The thing that I hear again and again and again, year after year after year, is this: I love being around my kids. I love being around my kids. And what they communicate is that, like my own children, who are also Great Heart Scholars, family dinner sometimes lasts until 10 p.m. What something I say to our families as they're joining the school, or they're coming in at sixth grade, which is the first year for my school. Of course, we have many families who are coming to us from our lower school who've been with us from K through 5, but we have a lot of new families who come to us in sixth grade. Is that we are saying no to something very, very small so that we can say yes to something so much more. So, what are we saying yes to? And saying no to phones and chatting and being on Insta for the 8 hours of the school day. What are we saying no to? um, well, we're saying no to being connected on social media. Maybe you're feeling, maybe you're a little bit missing out from your ISD friends who are chatting with each other during algebra class. You're saying no to something there, and for a teenager, that can feel like something, right? That can feel like a loss of connection during those 8 hours. We're saying no to that, but we're also saying yes to significantly decreased rates of anxiety. We're saying yes to, right now, it's 12 o'clock. In another hour, our high school students are going to be out on our turf. And they're not going to be doing this during lunch. They play volleyball, they're playing soccer, they bring their instruments, they're playing guitar. They're talking, they're relating, they're connecting. We're saying yes to real human relationship. And furthermore, when you meet a Great Hearts graduate, we're saying yes to graduating the kinds of young adults who are going to look you in the eye and look
Mhm.
into your soul and see your heart and see you. And we're saying yes to the ability for our students to read thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of writing. Their reading list is equivalent to what I did in my PhD program at the University of Dallas, and a little bit more than that. And we're saying yes to the ability from even from kindergarten onward for our own scholars. My daughter, she's in eighth grade. She's able to she's able not just to read literature that was difficult for me. I remember when I was in high school and even when I was in my first couple years of college, she's able to read at that level and understand it and comprehend it. But more than that, she's able to allow that literature to form her interior in her interiority of being because her brain has her prefrontal cortex, of course, is not developed fully until she's age 25 or older. And so what she's consuming is either this fast bits of information that are disconnected and very much lacking depth, or else she's training her brain like a muscle to be able to consume complex ideas, to sit in silence, to listen to another classmate's ideas and respond to it. And so this tech-free environment, or I should say low-tech environment, as I always say to our families, we're at Great Hearts, we're very low-tech, high human. We're saying no to something very, very small so we can say yes to something so much more.
Amazing. Congratulations. You're doing exactly the right thing. And I hope more schools adopt what you're doing.
Thank
I'm
you.
jealous when I hear about this education. It's incredible. Wish I
I
could go back in time.
I wish I had it, right? I went to a wonderful public school in the state of Oregon. It was a really large public school, and I'm so grateful for my incredible teachers, who, yeah, I know that they did hard work and good work, but I but our students, I think won't quite know until they graduate and they come back to it
Mhm.
after college break. They don't fully grasp just how special this kind of education
Exactly.
is until they go and they meet kids who went to other kinds of schools.
Yeah. Amazing. Any other initiatives you're working on, ideas you're developing? I know that you do other things outside of Great Hearts. Anything you want to share with us? Things you're excited about?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited. I've really been focusing over these last 4 years. I have been I pivoted away from the university to really focus my mind and my heart on K through 12 education, and that's taken a form maybe more recently of really thinking about what leadership is, and within the great classical Western tradition. And so something I've been working along with our national network is developing some leadership courses that are built on the classics. So this has been really fun for me. I teach leaders throughout the Great Hearts network of schools. I teach a couple different leadership classes for them, and so I'll tell you about the most recent one that I taught. And I was able to do a small seminar on this at the National Symposium for Classical Education. But it's a class that was built somewhat on the framework that we used at the Dallas Institute for Humanities and Culture for principals and superintendents, where my mentor, Louise Cowan, and her husband, Dr. Donald Cowan, invited superintendents and public school teachers to come to these historic old homes in downtown Dallas to come and read the Odyssey and Oedipus and Antigone with them, and as well as Shakespeare's Tempest, and to look at these timeless texts within the classical tradition, to look at what principles for leaderships might be for their own educational endeavors. And it was really fun to hear Louise over the years that I worked with her speak about this just this marvelous encounter with these educational leaders within the Dallas community. And so we've taken that and we've created from that rough curriculum that the Cowmans used at the Dallas Institute. We've taken that and made it into a scalable course for our Great Hearts leaders. And so, for example, what I mentioned, Oedipus, such a marvelous a cautionary tale for leaders, but also a really practical guidebook. Um, and so, for example, within that story of Oedipus, we get those. We get the principles of the three Delphic oracles, the three teaching, the three key ideas from the Delphic oracle. So know thyself, right? And then nothing in excess, and then certainty brings ruin. And so I walk
Good.
school leaders through that play, that wonderful play by Sophocles, and we look at, first of all, that blindness of Oedipus. Oedipus doesn't listen to the people around him. He doesn't listen to Tiresias when Tiresias tells him, "Stop! This isn't going to end well for you, Oedipus." And we talk in Socratic conversation with our school leaders about what does it look like to listen to your team, to listen to the parents, to get out at lunch and talk to the kids, to be
Mm.
in the classrooms with your teachers, and to have really an open door with your faculty, and to most of all be guided by the truth, goodness, and beauty of the Western classical tradition, from the wisdom that we have there, but then also to be a leader who would really listen. And so we see what happens to Oedipus when he doesn't. So that's one example that we get from that leadership course. And the last time that I was teaching it, I was noticing that there are over 50,000 books on Amazon that have been written on leadership over the years. I mean, it's a hot market. And I've read many, many books on leadership, and not to be disparaging about the more contemporary books on leadership. But what's always interesting to me is when I read these books, I say, this is just a rehash of the Greeks, the Romans, the Hebrews, and the Christians, right? Those four pillars of the Western consciousness and our Western writers. You don't get a lot better than Sophocles or Homer on leadership. So that's been a real joy and delight to walk leaders through some of those classical texts, because they are, as Saint Augustine said, ever ancient, ever new. Truth is ever new, and the source of truth, right, is ever ancient and ever new.
That's a beautiful note to end on. I was going to ask you, what's the plan for nuking the public school system and expanding charter schools at Great Hearts? But you just answered it right there, forming the leaders. Well, I really wish you all the best with your mission, continued success, and thanks so much for the conversation, Dr. Dyer.
Yes, well, thank you, and I wish you all the best as well.